NRA of knives, Trump's not-so-great outdoors.
They just don't get it.
And the royalty of American Mardi Gras. Testifying before the House Intelligence Committee, FBI Director Christopher Wray contradicted the White House's timeline on the investigation of Staff Secretary Rob Porter.
The FBI submitted a partial report on the investigation in question in March, and then a completed background investigation in late July. That is, soon thereafter, we received requests for follow-up inquiry, and we did the follow-up and provided that information in November, and then we administratively closed the file in January. And then earlier this month, we received some additional information, and we passed that on as well.
That account differs from the White House's statement last week that Porter's background investigation was still, quote, ongoing. Today, Sarah Sanders said that any findings from the FBI would have gone to an administrative office, which hadn't yet made a final recommendation on Porter when he resigned on Wednesday. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is vowing to stay in office in the face of a police recommendation today that he should be indicted for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. Netanyahu maintains that he's done nothing wrong, but Israeli police say there's sufficient evidence against him in 2 separate corruption cases. The country's attorney general now has to decide whether or not to charge him. South Africa's ruling party, the African National Congress, demanded today that President Jacob Zuma step down. The party decided to issue a formal recall notice after Zuma, who's been engulfed in financial scandal, indicated he wouldn't resign for another 3 to 6 months. He's expected to respond formally by tomorrow. Zuma has denied corruption allegations, but that hasn't done much to pacify his opponents, or even the ANC, which removed him as head of the party in December. If he doesn't give up the presidency on his own, a parliamentary vote could force him out. A member of Boko Haram who took part in the 2014 kidnapping of 276 schoolgirls has been given a 15-year jail sentence. He's the first militant to be sentenced for the mass abduction, as the Nigerian Justice Ministry resumed trials this week for more than 1,000 suspected insurgents. 112 of the girls are still being held by Boko Haram. Amnesty International has estimated that, overall, the group is holding thousands of women and children captive. The terrorist who planted 9 bombs in New York and New Jersey in 2016 has been sentenced to multiple life terms in prison. More than 30 people were injured when one of Ahmed Khan Rahimi's bombs exploded in Manhattan's Chelsea neighborhood. He was arrested 2 days later after a shootout with police in New Jersey and convicted last October. Prosecutors say he hasn't shown any remorse and has tried to radicalize his fellow inmates in federal prison. American public health officials are struggling to catch up with a killer disease, this year's seasonal flu. The flu virus is already responsible for 63 pediatric deaths and is sickening as many people as at the peak of the 2009 H1N1 pandemic. In fact, of all the deaths in the United States last week, 1 in 10 was caused by flu or pneumonia that's likely flu-related. On a call with reporters, the Center for Disease Control was frank about the bleak outlook.
We were hoping to have better news, but unfortunately, it looks like this flu season continues to be particularly challenging. Our latest tracking data indicate that influenza activity is still on the rise overall. We don't know if we've hit the peak yet.
There are a number of different influenza strains circulating during any flu season. A big part of the problem with this one is that the flu vaccine people have been getting seems to be working poorly against the dominant strain in North America this year, influenza A H3N2. The CDC hasn't released its own numbers yet, but the Canadian government found that this year's flu vaccine is only about 17% effective against H3N2. In previous years, the flu vaccine has been as much as 60% effective. So why is this one so far off? Dr. Catherine Edwards chairs the FDA panel that meets twice a year to select which influenza strain should be included in the annual vaccine.
The influenza virus is a very, very difficult and hardy foe. And the influenza virus is very, very good at changing so that it can get around the immunity that we've had from the previous years. And generally, to protect against that, the influenza vaccines will have at least 3, and many will have 4 different strains in the vaccine. There are sites that are funded throughout the world to collect influenza strains from people, from birds, from pigs, to try and understand what is actually happening in nature. We look at those very carefully. We do genetic analysis, and we actually find out exactly what makes up each influenza strain and how it matches certain vaccine strains. It's a process that takes wise people in science and tries to make the best guess for what strain will be circulating. But it's fair to say that we do not bat 1,000.
Part of the problem is that we've been making flu vaccines the same way since the 1940s, by growing viruses in chicken eggs. And recent research suggests this process itself may be one culprit, causing changes in the H3N2 strain that result in the finished vaccine being less effective. Doctors say you should get the flu shot anyway, because even if protection isn't good against H3N2, it could offer better protection against the other strains. In the meantime, researchers are scrambling to develop a so-called universal vaccine that would offer long-lasting protection against all flu strains. More than 30 different candidates are in development and testing. But when they'll be on the market is anyone's guess.
This is the knife I designed. It was made by Benchmade for almost 12 years. The sales of this knife is what provides the income that allows me to spend all my time working on knife rights.
From this tiny room in a subdivision outside Phoenix, Doug Ritter runs Knife Rights, an organization dedicated to alleviating a problem you might not have known existed: oppressive knife laws.
There is no one who is proactively going around the country and working to get rid of knife bans. That's where we came in, a proactive, aggressive grassroots movement.
Knife Rights is essentially the NRA of knives, but much smaller. It's basically run by Doug and his wife, and a lobbyist.
Fighting for your rights and a sharper future for all of us.
In the 11 years since Ritter founded it, it's helped make laws in more than 20 states more knife-friendly. In Texas, it successfully fought for a bill that made it legal to carry any kind of blade in public, even a sword.
What would be your example of the ideal state for knife laws?
You're standing in it. There are no illegal knives in Arizona, period.
Changing the laws in friendly red states is one thing, but for the past few years, Ritter's main project has been in tougher territory. New York City, where Ritter is mounting a constitutional challenge to an antiquated law that bans what are known as gravity knives. Gravity knives were outlawed in New York in 1958. The classic definition of a gravity knife is that it's any knife that opens by gravity alone, like this German World War II paratrooper's blade. But the New York law also says that a knife that can be opened by centrifugal force counts as a gravity knife. That is interpreted to mean that any knife that can be opened with a single wrist flick is potentially illegal, and that a lot of New Yorkers are walking around with knives they don't even know could get them in trouble.
Gravity knife enforcement in New York City is discrimination on steroids.
Marty LaFalce is a lawyer with the Legal Aid Society.
I'll see you tomorrow, okay?
A public defender service in Manhattan.
6,000 people arrested every year at the height of stop and frisk. 86% of those people, Black or Latino. Post stop and frisk, we've found that approximately 4,000 people are arrested every year for so-called gravity knife possession.
Did you know what a gravity knife was?
What a gravity knife was. I'm like,
you were thinking like which one of my knives?
Which one of the knives was a gravity knife? I'm like, I didn't know. I had no idea.
In 2014, Roderick Prude was on his way to work when, he says, he was stopped by police officers who saw his chef's knives in his backpack. Searching him, they found a folding knife that he says he used to cut boxes on the job. He was charged with possession of a gravity knife, and because of some priors, the charge was bumped up to a felony.
Here you're charging me with a 3.5-inch pocket knife, and I got Chucky blades in my bag, you know? So, didn't make sense to me. For a pocket knife to have somebody's life ruined is crazy. It really is.
Every day, my colleagues and I represent clients who have been arrested for possessing knives that they've purchased at stores like Ace Hardware, AutoZone, Lowe's. And even if we can prove that our clients use the knives for work, in some cases, prosecutors still bring felony prosecutions. In the era of numbers-based policing, you see this dramatic increase in the prosecution of people who are possessing just common folding knives that are designed, marketed, and sold as work tools.
Last year, the New York State Legislature passed a law to change the gravity knife rule, but it was vetoed at the last minute by Governor Andrew Cuomo. Police groups and New York City politicians want to keep the law in place because they say it keeps New Yorkers safe. LaFalce and Legal Aid are now working with Knife Rights to challenge the law in court. The two organizations make for unlikely allies.
Never in a million years would I think that I would be working with a Second Amendment group on a criminal justice issue.
Doug Ritter has his own reasons for fighting the New York law. He's a knife purist. If there's a knife law, he wants it abolished. But Ritter says the problem with the New York law is more basic. It's so vague that it's impossible to know for sure you're following it. Are these knives legal in New York?
There's no way to tell. That's the problem in New York City. You can never know your knife is legal because even if you can't wrist flick it open, if a police officer or prosecutor can, then your legal knife becomes illegal.
Let's try this one. Legal in New York?
Maybe. Maybe not.
I can't do it. Can you do it?
And the problem is, just because you can't do it doesn't mean someone else can't do it. Oh, that's an illegal knife. One of our plaintiffs even showed his knife to two different cops on two different occasions, and they were not able to wrist flick it open, and so he thought he was safe. The third cop he met on the street was able to wrist flick it open, and he went to jail. How in anybody's mind is that just?
On January 15th, 9 of the 12 members of the National Park System Advisory Board resigned en masse. The all-volunteer board, whose members included leading scientists, professors, and former politicians, isn't exactly famous. But it is important. It's tasked with advising on landmark designations and recommending new ones. The members said they were sick of being ignored by the Interior Department, which said it was happy to see them go.
Wow, looky here.
That's going to be
This
really
is nice.
I'm just going to set up my pup tent here and
This is good.
hang out.
No, this is great. So the board that you were all on, what exactly were its responsibilities?
What the charter is of the board is to approve these national historic landmarks and approve natural landmarks.
We offer advice and guidance, not only from the 12 of us, but our committees. Milton had a huge education committee. Belinda had a huge urban committee.
No, I think it's fair to say we were the most active National Park System Advisory Board at the request of the NPS director, former director, John Jarvis.
He basically opened that portfolio much more broadly and said, I'd like to get advice on how we're going to change the Park Service to be more relevant to our broader urban communities. How do we make it more relevant to people of color?
What exactly was it like to be on the board under the Trump administration? What changed with regards to being on the board versus when Obama was in power?
We're all shaking our heads because we don't know.
Right.
We were never communicated with. We were never convened for a meeting. It was positively 0-0 communication. Arbitrarily, the Secretary of Interior withdrew the order to the Park Service that came out of our work of the Science Committee to have science be part of management decisions, and specifically climate change. And they rescinded that order in August. And now there can be no reference to either science or climate change in the management decisions. I mean, that blew my mind.
When the fee issue came up, that was like kind of the clincher for me. As it is, we have a real challenge with how costly it is, to visit our national parks.
And by the way, the fees were raised for $70 million in aggregate. For maintenance, the maintenance backlog is $11 billion. $70 million would have been a true drop in the bucket.
I mean, we waited for a year to be asked for our advice, and when it became clear we were not going to be asked or convened, and I personally, again, as a member of this advisory board, said, okay, we see where you're going. We've given you time, and you're going in the opposite direction. It was pretty clear that this administration was not interested in our work, but we also wanted to make the statement that we did not want to be part of their agenda.
Wouldn't you have been more effective if you had stayed on the board and waited it out? Have you also given up some of your power by resigning?
I don't think so. It became clear that there was going to be little way that we would have any influence. If we were concerned enough for the National Park Service that we just felt the time is now, let's do it.
So you were raising an alarm?
Yes.
How did it feel to resign from the board?
The response from the Interior made me crazy.
The response was absolutely terrible.
It was terrible.
It was derogatory, discrediting, dishonest. It was everything.
Well,
they called us dishonest.
Yes.
How did that make you feel?
Angry.
Really?
This administration has really no understanding of the unique mission of the National Park Service. They don't recognize the important role of saving the resource for our grandchildren and their grandchildren forever, but also the important role of welcoming everybody into the national parks for an exceptional experience. We, the people, own the parks.
That's right.
And it distinguishes us as a country as opposed to other countries that also have national parks, but are much more privatized than ours, and we certainly hope that doesn't occur.
I may have resigned, but actually the work isn't done. It's like I wrote on some post, I have resigned, but I am not resigned to the current circumstances.
I started sewing when I was 12. My mother insisted that if I was going to wear any more pretty clothes, I had to make them. What I'm doing is trying to cushion the queen's neck from the wire. So I'm adding real fur to give that softness. My name is Patricia Hassell Richardson. I am a Mardi Gras designer. I design king and queen's regalia and ladies and gentlemen of the royal court. I'm always thinking. I'm always designing in my head.
What time is the ball tonight?
I think it starts at 10, if I'm not mistaken. This year's queen's train is 18 feet long and 9 feet wide. And it's 4 layers of fabric. It's very heavy. It's about 65 to 75 pounds. Mardi Gras is very glitzy, glammy, the beads, the rhinestones, the fringe, all of the hoopy stuff is Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras started in Mobile. Most people have a misconception that it started in New Orleans, but Mobile is the home of Mardi Gras. It's different from New Orleans because Mobile, it's like family. We come home for Mardi Gras versus come home for Christmas.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2018 Comrades Ball Extravaganza.
There are many different crews and societies and organizations of Mardi Gras. But the two main were on the Mobile Carnival Association. I think mostly of European descent. Mobile Area Mardi Gras Association is a little different. That's predominantly an African American organization. People think that it's just so segregated. You know, it's not. It's culture. MCA has their culture. MAFA has their culture. But they come together and they have a good time. You respect each other's culture. Okay, let's see what it looks like before you sit.
Okay.
The young lady I designed for is Tiffany Hall.
Great, and it looks beautiful on you.
This is the first year for my family to actually have someone as a queen. It showcases a lot of your accomplishments, and it just gives you that high honor of, you know, I did something great and I'm honoring my family while doing it. So here in Mobile, to be the queen is like to rule the city for Mardi Gras.
The royal coronation is the first time the queen and king is wearing their regalia. That is the whole thing, the pageantry of the coronation and of seeing the royal subjects and the public seeing the queen and king. That's where she's crowned. So she's not queen yet. The king crowns his queen. And it's just so magical. And it's just beautiful. You know, I love creating, I love designing. I just love seeing people look beautiful, and I love to see people happy and feeling good. That's what it means to me, it's just making somebody's dreams come true. Mardi Gras is all make-believe, it's not reality. You know, it's just a little time you took out of reality to do something different in your life.
That's Vice News Tonight for Tuesday, February 13th.